Welcome back. You're watching Fin Week Money Matters. Now, money and assets are one of the most contentious discussions that married couples can end up facing. But if it's not documented up front, then this can sorely hurt relationships. We take a look at how to keep money and marriages together. And still with me is Jessica Hubbard, and of course joining our conversation now, Ceri von Ludwig, an attorney, and Henry van Deventer, who's head of business development at Acsis as well. Welcome to you both. Thanks so much for joining our conversation this afternoon. Well, it may be a difficult topic, but it's a subject that has to be breached. And Ceri, let's start off with you, because it's hard to believe that we still find couples that are struggling to have the conversation. Surely this is a reality that needs to be faced.
I couldn't have put it better myself. There are so many people who just can't face it. And I'm predominantly a divorce lawyer, so I come across the people who haven't faced it. And quite soon after marriages as well. And I mean, there's also a little bit of a comment that if you can't communicate prior to your marriage on important subjects like this, where possibly is your marriage going to go? And one of the things that I do say to clients is, this is something that is relevant on death as well. So yes, you may not want to sit down and say, darling, what's going to happen when we divorce? But we are all, like it or not, going to pass away. And that being said, it makes it so much easier to regulate your estate if you've thought about the proprietary consequences of your marriage and you've chosen whether or not you want an antenuptial contract.
So what are the options that we're looking at? It may seem basic, but for those who haven't fully understood, what the options are, spell it out for us.
Well, it is so basic that it's hard not to understand. Your first one, your default regime is in community of property. If you don't have a contract, if you don't sign anything, you're married in community of property. And the best way to look at it would be if you have one pot of stew. So everything that both spouses contribute falls into that pot. Imagine it all boils up into a soup. So you can no longer go and say, my carrot, my potato, my salt. You take a measuring jug and you split 50-50. That's your first one. The second one is the diametric opposite of that, which is out of community of property. No sharing whatsoever. You have your pot, I have mine. The beauty of that is that everybody knows what they own. What's mine is mine, what's yours is yours. The problem is that if one party doesn't contribute and contributes it in a different way, in the way that one can only do in a marriage, through emotions, through support, there is no sharing. And the third regime, which is called out of community of property with application of the accrual system, is meant to be a combination of the two I've just told you about and give you the best of both worlds, which in many cases it does, but in some very unfortunate instances it doesn't.
It may sound simplistic, but Henry, let's bring you in here. How do you work out which one's best for you?
Well, I think the reality is, tough as this is to say, because we love each other a lot when we marry, and we all do believe, as we should, that it'll never go wrong. But part of the question we have to ask ourselves, and this is very real today, is with both partners in a marriage earning money, both of them being professionally successful, it is likely that one spouse or the other will take half a step back professionally to either spend more time with the kids, maybe work half day, etc. And nowadays it's not only the wife, it could be any one of the spouses. So the reality is, if you happen to be the spouse that's going to take half a step back, it's going to cost you money in terms of loss of income. So the kind of thinking traditionally is, well, we'll marry in community of property and we'll share anything. Is that a good idea? Half of South Africans have a bad credit record. So firstly, much as you may love a person, it may be that based on their past financial behavior, you may not want to take over half the assets and or half the liabilities, and you need to understand what that picture is. If you look at something like being married in community or out of community, ANC with accrual, at least since the day you get married, you get to split all the assets you accumulate past the point of getting married. And especially if one spouse is going to sacrifice a portion of their income ability, it just seems to me to be fair. But then again, maybe I'm an idealist. And the final argument also might be, you need to look at the professional risks you face and the potential liabilities you may suffer as a consequence of that risk. Because if you have one spouse that's an entrepreneur, owns a lot of businesses, has got a lot of debt, etc., or that's a spendthrift and can't manage their money well, maybe you want to hang on to your assets indefinitely, and being married out of community of property makes a little bit more sense.
But I have a totally mercenary question now. What happens if you have one spouse who earns significantly more than the other? Yes, I appreciate one, you have the other person is probably contributing more time. What do you do in a situation? And it was a question we had posed from one of our readers this week, was my partner earns significantly more than I do, puts more into the pot. I want to still feel like I'm contributing, but I will never be able to contribute the same amount that not having the same earning power that my spouse earns. How do you handle something like that?
Well, it's a very important question, because for most of us it's about our own sense, I guess, of self-worth inside of a relationship. It's about self-respect and feeling that we make a contribution. Now being a Johannesburger sitting in the Sandton studio, probably this is the wrong thing to say, but money, is not the most important thing when it comes to a marriage and relationship. Probably time is more important. And I think a lot of us in our thinking get so stuck into measuring our worth based on the money we contribute, as opposed to thinking about the time we contribute. So respectfully, to that viewer who sent in the question, I think maybe it will make sense to sit down with your partner and talk about how you measure the value. Because if you'll never measure up financially, it doesn't make you a worse person, it doesn't make you less valuable, it probably makes you more valuable.
Ceri,
go for it.
Ceri, can you change a contract? Or is it a case of once you've gone down a specific route, chosen that specific avenue, it's a case of till death do us part?
It is possible to change a contract, but it's a High Court application. So that's obviously one has to depose to an affidavit saying why you want to change the contract. And it has a cost factor attendant. One would obviously have to pay to get into High Court. And another thing that's very important is that you have to allege in the affidavit that it wouldn't prejudice creditors. So for example, if you were, let's say, married in community of property, and therefore you would both owe the creditor the money, and you're now trying to squirrel out of that by marrying out of community of property and saying, I'm out of here, these debts are no longer mine, they must be all yours. Obviously there is going to be a prejudice to that creditor, and that creditor will object, and it's possible then that the court won't allow you that relief.
I'd like to pose a question to both of you. Are you seeing a change in the approach to marriage contracts and the financial arrangements in terms of generations? So are you seeing the younger up-and-coming professionals approaching it in a different way to the older generations who are used to sort of the one breadwinner, or is it relatively the same?
Are we going to do ladies first?
Of course we are. Of course we are.
Why not? I'll grab any chance I can. I've definitely seen a change. I've been in practice for 25 years, so I think I've seen quite a lot of this. There are many more young couples at the moment understanding that it is not necessarily wrong or mercenary to perhaps marry out of community of property. Also what we're seeing the result of not properly considered accrual marriages. People don't fully understand it. Something I don't understand is that people will spend fortunes on a wedding dress and a wedding and a honeymoon and the cake, and they won't spend more than a couple of £100 on their antenuptial. And therefore they don't take the correct advice, they misunderstand the accrual system, and in their divorce they are badly, badly burned. So what I'm finding now is that people are saying, you know what, there is nothing wrong with being married out of community of property. I work and I may run up debt, I may fail, successful entrepreneurs don't always succeed first time around, and they're very careful to say, this is mine, that's yours, and then at least we always know where our expectations are. And if they're properly advised, they can understand that they can nonetheless own certain joint property or make donations or do some sort of a household arrangement, which might have applied to your lady earlier, saying, you know, how do I increase my worth, as it were? But yes, there is a significant change, and people are also getting better educated and a little wiser.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think another point and another dynamic that has changed quite a bit through the course of the last 20, 30 years. Nowadays we live in a society where, you know, the wife that traditionally was the lesser earning, financially inferior party in a traditional marriage. Boy, please don't kick me under the table. It's changed.
You are outnumbered.
I know. Nowadays, it may well be that the wife as a spouse earns more money, and that brings with it a number of very important psychological dynamics. Firstly, I'm my own own person. I want to make my own financial decisions, regardless of the gender of the spouse. And secondly, do I want to become a victim of the financial behavior of my spouse? I may love you very much, but your inability to control your financial impulses or your attitudes towards risk, investments, expenditure might be significantly different from mine. And if that is the case, and we're all human, we're all unique, so it's not uncommon for that to be the case, you need to be darn sure before you get married that you've got a very clear understanding of jointly, how will we contribute together, what will we pay for together, who will be doing what, and what won't we do together. Because if you don't have that framework going in, it's a recipe for disaster.
I mean, Ceri, maybe one of the questions though is, as you say, people, you grow up through a relationship. You grow up. You might get married in your early 20s. Your earning power changes. Your assets change. How retrospective can you be or how dynamic can you be in terms of that marriage contract, in being able to say, my asset situation have changed. I could have been totally broke when I came in. I'm now far more secure. I want to be able to keep changing my assets, my legal structure around my assets. What are the options there in terms of protecting or ring fencing assets within a relationship perspective?
Pretty much no in terms of your antenuptial contract, because as we said, you've made one of your three choices and you're stuck by that unless you can apply to High Court for a variation. But if you have a couple who is and let me interrupt myself and say this. I was about to say, if you have a couple who is communicating well, you can nonetheless deal with things by deciding, should we form a company? How are we going to do this investment? Should we buy something in our joint names? Let's investigate a trust, etc., etc. The time when it becomes relevant is when the couple is not communicating well, and by then it's too late. And that is the problem. So you're quite right, it's very difficult when you're 25, say, to decide how you're going to get married and how that is going to affect you going forwards. But unfortunately, well, I'm not sure that it is unfortunately. I think that's a really big topic that we could unbundle over a very long period of time. I don't think that your contract is necessarily absolutely exclusive of your going forward dealings, but you've always got to be aware of what your contract says, because that's my biggest concern. People come to me on a divorce and they say, well, at least I'll be getting half of this. You say, great, why do you say that? Let's have a look at the documents. And the documents don't say that. So from the date that they concluded their contract, they've been transacting incorrectly because they didn't understand what they'd done in the first place.
Absolutely. Well, it certainly is interesting.
Yeah, perhaps just one or two thoughts to add to that. And if you really want, you can have a trust, you can donate 100,000 Rand per year, etc. But then that money is also no longer yours. It's a trust money. Point number two, if you've got a son-in-law or daughter-in-law whose financial behavior you don't quite trust, and you bequeath to their spouse, your daughter or your son, that bequest can be made to fall outside of their joint assets. So if you've got young children and you're sitting on the cash, maybe also think about making those bequests in such a way that you can protect your spouse against their more dangerous
Absolutely. Well,